moment I stepped into the house, a chill ran down my spine. The kind of chill that makes your skin prickle and your breath hitch. It wasn't just the cold, it was the feeling that I wasn't alone, even though the house was supposed to be empty. I had inherited this old Victorian house from my great-aunt Martha, whom I'd only met a few times as a child. The house had always stood out in our family, this grand, decaying structure on the edge of a small town, shrouded in mystery and stories of strange occurrences. I had been warned about it, but I needed a change, and the idea of a fresh start in a new place was too tempting to pass up. The first night, I barely slept. The house creaked and groaned like an old ship at sea. Every little sound was amplified in the darkness, the rustling of leaves against the windows, the distant hoot of an owl, the persistent drip of a faucet in the kitchen. I tried to tell myself it was just an old house settling, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps above me. They were slow and deliberate, each step echoing through the silence. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to listen, hoping it was just my imagination. But the footsteps continued, moving from one end of the attic to the other. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured upstairs, my hands trembling. The attic door was slightly ajar, and I could see a sliver of darkness beyond it. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open and shone the light inside. The beam of the flashlight cut through the thick dust and cobwebs, revealing nothing but old furniture and forgotten boxes. I turned to leave, but then I heard it, a whisper, faint and almost unintelligible. "Leave, now." My blood ran cold. I swung the flashlight around, but there was no one there, just the shadows playing tricks on my mind. I backed out of the attic and closed the door, my heart racing. The next morning, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was just the wind, or perhaps I was overtired and my mind was playing tricks on me. I busied myself with unpacking, trying to ignore the lingering unease that clung to me like a second skin. Days passed, and the feeling of being watched never left me. Every night, the footsteps returned, sometimes accompanied by whispers and faint laughter. I started to dread the arrival of dusk, knowing that the night would bring with it the torment of unseen eyes and ghostly sounds. One evening, I decided to dig through the boxes left in the attic, hoping to find some clue about what was happening. Among the dusty old books and family heirlooms, I found a leather-bound journal. It was Martha's. The entries were sparse at first, detailing her daily life and the upkeep of the house. But as I read further, the tone changed. She wrote about strange noises, objects moving on their own, and the feeling of being watched. She mentioned a spirit and angry presence that seemed to grow stronger each day. Martha's final entry sent chills down my spine. "I fear I have angered it. I should have listened. It wants me gone, and I can feel its wrath growing. I don't know how much longer I can endure this." I slammed the journal shut, my heart pounding. That night, the footsteps were louder, the whispers more insistent. "Leave, now." I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to leave the house, at least for a while, to clear my head and figure out what to do next. I packed a bag and headed for the door, but as I reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. The door was locked, and no matter how hard I pulled, it wouldn't open. Panic set in. I ran to the back door, but it was the same. Trapped. I felt a cold breeze brush against my neck, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. Turning slowly, I saw a shadowy figure at the end of the hallway, tall, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The figure moved closer, its form shifting and flickering like a flame. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet and falling to the ground. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. "Leave, now." Desperation took over. I ran to the attic, hoping to find something, anything that could help. As I reached the top of the stairs, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. The flashlight flickered and died, leaving me alone in the pitch black. I could feel its presence, hovering just out of reach. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. The whispers became a chorus of angry voices, surrounding me, pressing in from all sides. In the darkness, I found Martha's journal and clutched it to my chest, hoping it could somehow protect me. I closed my eyes and prayed for morning, for the nightmare to end. I must have passed out, because when I opened my eyes, the sun was streaming through the attic window. The house was silent, but the oppressive feeling of being watched had lessened. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my things and fled the house, vowing never to return. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the shadowy figure standing in the attic window, watching me leave. I've since learned that the house has a dark history, one filled with tragedy and loss. But whatever haunts it, I hope it remains there, bound to that decaying structure. I'll never forget the terror I felt, and I pray no one else ever has to endure it. I still hear the whispers in my dreams, telling me to leave, and I know, deep down, that it's a warning I'll heed for the rest of my life. The first time I saw the cabin, it was a sunny afternoon in late summer. The real estate agent had warned me it was a bit remote, but I was looking for solitude, a place to escape the chaos of city life. Nestled deep in the woods, the cabin was charming in its rustic way, small, with a wraparound porch and a stone fireplace. It was perfect. I moved in the following week, bringing only the essentials. The first few days were blissful. I spent my time hiking through the forest, reading on the porch, and enjoying the peace and quiet. It was everything I had hoped for. But on the third night, something changed. I was sitting by the fireplace, the only light coming from the flickering flames, when I heard it, a soft, distant humming. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound was too melodic, too intentional. I stood up and listened, straining to pinpoint its source. It seemed to be coming from outside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The humming grew louder as I approached the edge of the woods. I hesitated, the beam of my flashlight dancing across the trees, but I couldn't see anything unusual. The sound was coming from deeper within the forest. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow it. The forest was thick, the trees casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and grab at me. The humming led me deeper and deeper until I reached a small clearing. In the center stood an old well, its stone surface covered in moss and vines. The humming was louder now, almost deafening, and it was coming from the well. I approached cautiously, peering over the edge. The darkness inside was impenetrable, and the humming seemed to resonate from its depths. As I leaned in closer, the flashlight slipped from my hand and tumbled into the well, disappearing into the darkness with a splash. The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. I backed away, my heart pounding, and ran back to the cabin. Once inside, I bolted the door and checked the windows, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. The silence was oppressive, and I found myself jumping at every creak and groan the cabin made. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the humming, felt the darkness of the well closing in around me. When morning finally came, I resolved to leave the cabin. Whatever peace I had hoped to find here was overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. I packed my bags and loaded them into my car, but as I turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtered and died. I tried again, but the car refused to start. Panic set in. I was miles from the nearest town, with no cell service and no way to call for help. With no other options, I decided to walk. I grabbed a backpack, filled it with essentials, and set out on the narrow dirt road that led to the main highway. The forest seemed darker than before, the trees looming over me like silent sentinels. I walked for what felt like hours, but the road seemed endless, stretching on and on with no end in sight. As dusk began to fall, I realized I was lost. The road had disappeared, swallowed by the dense forest. I tried retracing my steps, but every direction looked the same, an endless maze of trees and shadows. Exhausted and disoriented, I stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center stood the well. I froze, my heart racing. How had I ended up back here? The air grew cold, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The humming started again, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. I felt a presence behind me, and I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, tall and gaunt, its face hidden in shadow. The humming seemed to emanate from it, filling the air with an unnatural sound. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure raised a hand, and the humming grew louder, piercing my ears, filling my mind with a darkness that felt tangible. I don't remember how I got back to the cabin. The next thing I knew, I was huddled in front of the fireplace. the humming still echoing in my ears. I must have blacked out, because when I opened my eyes, it was morning. The cabin was silent, the oppressive feeling gone. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my bags and started walking, not stopping until I reached the main highway. A passing motorist found me and gave me a ride to the nearest town. I never went back to the cabin. I sold it for a loss and moved far away, hoping to forget the experience. But the humming never left me. Sometimes, late at night, I hear it again, faint and distant, as if calling me back. And I know deep down that whatever haunts that forest isn't done with me yet. When I first took the night shift at St. Augustine's Hospital, I thought it would be a quiet, easy gig. As a security guard, my job was to patrol the empty halls, ensure the doors were locked, and make sure no one unauthorized wandered in. The hospital, no longer in use except for storage and occasional research by a few remaining staff, had a reputation for being haunted, but I didn't believe in ghosts. I needed the money. The first few nights were uneventful, just long stretches of silence broken by the occasional sound of dripping water or distant machinery. But on the fourth night, things started to change. It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard it, a faint whispering sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I was in the basement, checking the storage rooms, when the whispering began. At first, I thought it was the wind whistling through the old pipes, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. It was a voice, murmuring something I couldn't quite make out. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. There was no response, just the persistent whispering. I felt a chill run down my spine and quickly finished my rounds, eager to get back to the relative safety of my office. The next night, the whispering returned, this time accompanied by the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls. I checked the security monitors, but the screens showed nothing but deserted corridors and empty rooms. I decided to investigate, hoping to find some rational explanation, a loose window, maybe, or a stray animal. Armed with a flashlight and my nightstick, I walked the halls, the sound of my footsteps blending with the mysterious ones that seemed to come from just around the corner. I followed the noise to the old maternity ward, a place I always found particularly unsettling. The footsteps stopped as I approached the nursery, its glass windows covered in a thick layer of dust. I shone my flashlight inside and nearly dropped it in shock. In the middle of the room stood a figure, pale and translucent, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. It was a woman, her face twisted in a mask of sorrow. She reached out towards me, her lips moving as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the room empty once more. I didn't sleep that day, the image of the ghostly woman haunting my thoughts. I decided to do some research, hoping to find some explanation for what I had seen. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. St. Augustine's had a dark history. In the 1950s, there was a scandal involving the maternity ward. Dozens of infants had died under mysterious circumstances, and it was rumored that one of the nurses, a woman named Eleanor, had been responsible. She had taken her own life in the nursery after being accused, though there was never any concrete evidence against her. I wondered if the ghost I had seen was Eleanor, trapped in the place where she had died, her spirit restless and filled with sorrow. The thought made my skin crawl, but I couldn't bring myself to quit. I needed the job, and part of me was determined to uncover the truth. The encounters grew more frequent and more intense. Doors would slam shut behind me, lights would flicker on and off, and the whispering followed me wherever I went. The ghostly figure of Eleanor appeared almost every night, her presence both terrifying and tragic. One night I decided to confront her. I returned to the nursery, the air thick with tension. "Eleanor," I called out, my voice trembling. "If you're here, show yourself." The room grew colder, and the whispering intensified. She appeared before me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and desperation. "Why are you here?" I asked. "What do you want?" Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. Frustration welled up inside me. "I can't understand you," I shouted. "Tell me what you want." Suddenly, she lunged at me, her form passing through me like a blast of icy wind. I fell to the floor, gasping for breath, my body numb with cold. Images flashed through my mind, scenes of her life, the accusations, her despair, and finally her death. I felt her pain, her sorrow, her endless torment. When I came to, I was lying in the hallway outside the nursery, my head throbbing. I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever Eleanor wanted, I couldn't give it to her. She was trapped in her own hell, and there was nothing I could do to help her. I handed in my resignation the next day. The hospital administration barely batted an eye, used to the high turnover rate among night staff. As I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was abandoning Eleanor to her fate, but I knew I had no choice. Even now, years later, I can't forget her. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the whispering again, and I wonder if she's still there, waiting for someone to help her find peace. But I know I'll never go back. St. Augustine's Hospital is a place best left to the ghosts.